Hello everybody, I'm Alyssa from Meditative Astrology. Today we're going to walk through the astrology of February 8th through 14th. This is the week that Saturn enters the sign of Aries, where it's going to stay for good for the next couple of years. We have a couple other aspects that are going on. We're going to get into all of that. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do so now so we can walk this astrological journey together. You won't miss these weekly videos that come out Saturday mornings, nor will you miss the live meditations that we have Sunday nights, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. That is a live astrologically guided meditation where we really take the astrology and the transits that are above all of us and bring it down to a personal level. Have that personal conversation with the energies, with the planets, with the gods, and with your own higher self, right? Communing with the energy. If you find us on social media, Facebook and Instagram, then you won't miss any other posts that we have, announcements, updates. Occasionally there's changes to the meditation schedule, things like that are all shared on social media, as well as our weekly intention. So every Friday there's an intention that is released that correlates with the upcoming week's astrology, and that is used specifically within the meditation. I like to give it to you Friday so that way you can have it ahead of the weekly video to sit with before you have any other input from me and just see what good stuff comes up for you. So yeah, find us on all of the things, like, follow, subscribe, and yeah, I would be absolutely honored to walk this astrological journey together. So let's go ahead and get through this week here, shall we? We start out at the beginning of the week without a whole lot other than following the moon around. So the moon's in the sign of Scorpio, starting us out on Sunday. That Scorpio moon is going to take us right into Monday, February 9th, where the moon is going to make a square to, an opposition to Uranus in the sign of Taurus. And then we're going to go ahead and move forward into Tuesday. This is where we start to get our action building up. Venus moves into the sign of Pisces, Tuesday, February 10th. I have just after 5 a.m. Eastern time. You may need to translate that to your own time zone. Venus in the sign of Pisces is in her exaltation, okay? So other than Venus's home signs of Taurus and Libra, this is the next best place to have her because there's some affinity between Venus and the sign of Pisces. They are, Venus is a feminine sign and Venus is a feminine planet, and Pisces is a feminine sign. The creative, receptive, empathetical and emotional connectedness that you find in Pisces vibes very well with Venus within her own right. There is a dreamy, creative, otherworldly, reflective, sometimes spiritual or deeply connected element to the sign of Pisces here. This is Jupiter's water sign. Venus is going to be moving into a trine with Jupiter later on in the month, February 22nd, if I remember to be exact. So she's moving towards this trine here after she moves into the sign of Pisces. And these two planets are in each other's, are in their home sign. So there is a reception between the two of them. Both of them are doing very well. So this is going to be a trine that is building that is going to be helpful for a lot of us with things that are going on. And, you know, she's also going to make a conjunction to Mercury through its retrograde phase here. And she's going to be sitting with the North Node at the time of the eclipse. So there's some important transits that Venus is going to go through the sign of Pisces. So look at where Pisces is within your chart. And through this time period, there's going to be some activations that are going to be happening there. When Venus moves into the sign of Pisces, the moon is going to be in the sign of Sagittarius, which is Jupiter's other sign here. So that just ups the connection and the receptivity to Venus entering this sign here. There's a lot of that Jupiterian energy at the beginning of this week here. So the desire here for Venus could be to truly feel a deep connection to something, right? Relationships, to some sort of creative project, or to our emotions, or to a conversation that we are having, whatever it may be here. But there's very creative and emotionally bonded connections in the sign of Pisces. So moving more energy from that airy headspace of the sign of Aquarius to Pisces, the water sign, the feminine water signs that we have here. So that's what we have coming through Tuesday. We go ahead and move forward into Wednesday. No exact aspects, so we're going to follow that Sagittarius moon all the way through into Thursday, February 12th. The moon will move into the sign of Capricorn. It'll make a couple aspects. We also have Mercury conjoining the North Node this day. Now, the North Node amplifies whatever it touches, right? It brings it into more focus. So this here is mentally, right? This is the way we communicate. These are our conversations. Mercury, Venus, and the Moon are all co-present together on Thursday. So this may feel like a very Piscean day. There might be a lot of emotions and a lot of connectedness, a lot of feeling in tune or yearning for connections or intuition coming through, nostalgic feelings, all of these type of things. So the North Node amplifies what it touches. However, when some of these planets move across the North Node, it's not always the loudest unless we have something personal that it is activating. However, we're moving closer to the eclipse, right? February 17th, we're going to have the eclipse in the sign of Aquarius. So it's an out of sign eclipse from where the nodes are. But I'm wondering where this may amplify those connections with the North Node, because we have an eclipse that's going to be coming just like the following week after this, right? So I'm wondering if that will kind of amplify this. So those mercurial things, our communications, our thoughts, our perceptions, the way we communicate with others, the way we perceive what other people communicate with us, as well as those communications we have within ourselves. I think there could be some mental conversations that are going on in our head where we are reflecting on some things here. Maybe the direction of which we are going and the direction of which we have been, right? So the environment, the emotional environment that we find ourselves in, and then asking questions about that. Mercury likes to ask questions, right? It likes to wonder and it likes to dissect and pull things apart here. So it may be asking emotionally tied questions, the bonds that I hold, are they serving me well? Am I moving in the right direction, right? Am I resourced enough to move forward in this way? Do I feel safe? Do I feel secure? Am I able to be vulnerable, right? Do I feel safe enough to open myself up? These are some of the things that I wonder if they could be coming through here Thursday for us. And then if we go ahead and move forward into Friday here, Saturn moves into the sign of Aries, where it's going to stay for the next couple years here. So the sign of Aries, this is Mars's fire sign. It's a cardinal sign. It is the first sign that initiates the zodiac if you start from the sign of Aries. And Saturn is considered to be in its fall in the sign of Aries. So this is a place where Saturn, when we talked about Venus being exalted and it being an environment that Venus can do well in, this is an environment that Saturn can't necessarily be itself in. It's in opposition to Libra, where Saturn is much more comfortable here. So Saturn in its own right represents endings, boundaries, limitations, right? The limitations of time and space. Saturn likes things that are black and white. It likes clear lines. It does not like gray, right? Saturn is slow, steady, paced. Saturn likes things that last long term. It calls for maturity. It calls for longevity. And if it can't get those things, then those whatever is at play may fall away here. So that's Saturn. In contrast, if we look at the sign of Aries, it's initiatory. Again, it's a cardinal sign, so it starts and initiates things. It's the beginning of the zodiacal wheel. It's the first sign of spring. So we are birthing into the light half of the year here. It's fast, it's moving, it's pioneering, it's youthful. It acts first and then it thinks later, right? There's reaction, where Saturn is slow and processed. There is a lot about autonomy and self-authority within the sign of Aries. Again, it's a fire sign, so there is creativity, there is passionate, movable, and inspired energy here, right? This is the creation fire. This is where something is being birthed, something that is just kind of starting. I've been thinking about Saturn moving into the sign of Aries, where Saturn is slow and methodical and likes to have a plan, right? Likes to have things laid out, black and white, where Aries just hits the ground running and goes. So I've been thinking of this in the terms of like a controlled burn, right? So you think about like having to burn brush that needs to make space for something new. So something needs to fall away here. I think about the spark when you light a campfire. and the vulnerability and the effort that it can take to, and the commitment that it can take to get that fire really going, right? If you've ever started a campfire, like when it first sparks and you first get that little fire, you really have to tend to it. You know, you might have to put more wood on it or kindling, or you might have to give it more oxygen or change the flow of air or whatever it is that you may need to do. But if you don't look at it, and if you don't pay attention and tend to that fire until it has a little bit of its own stability, and we could think about the stability of the fire maybe moving towards the sign of Taurus, then the fire is going to go out. So you can start it, you can initiate it, you might even put some, lighter fluid or something on it, right? A little bit of fuel to get it going there, but it will die down very quickly if you don't tend to that fire there. So that spark, that initiatory, that is the sign of Aries, right? The fire tender, the fire keeper, the one who has the poker that is tending to the fire while others are, if we're thinking about like a bonfire, maybe around like some sort of summer gathering or something, you have the others that are enjoying and doing their things. And then in my experience, often there's like one person that is tending to the fire and keeping it going or initiating it or whatnot. So those are some images that I've been playing with here that you could play with as well. Aries is Mars ruled. So this is the place where the sun, the light, we're coming back into the light's dominant, right? We're coming back into the light half of the year. So there is starting, there is initiating. Saturn signs are winter signs, right? Think about Capricorn, think about Aquarius. They are in the pit of the dark half of the year, right? The darkest days. Even though the light is slowly starting to return, it's still the darkest part of the year. It has the longest darkness, zodiacally speaking. So from the northern hemisphere perspective, you can see that literally, but zodiacally speaking, you can see it symbolically when you just think about winter and the darkness of winter. So Saturn is much more like winter, right? Saturn is also exalted in the sign of Libra, which ushers us into the dark half of the year. So with Saturn, you have that darkness, you have that decay. With Aries, you have springtime, initiatory, right? Think about when spring comes back. Think about the energy and the revival that we feel as things are starting to bloom. If you are planting and gardening, this may be the phase where you have little seedlings that you really have to tend to. Maybe you have to put some sort of fence around it so that way, animals don't get to it. There's a vulnerability in the sign of Aries that I think sometimes we miss because Aries just jumps so quickly into something. I think about being dropped into a battlefield of some kind, right? Or I think about like video games. So I was never one that was like super good or great at playing video games, but I would try to join in with people sometimes when I was a teenager or whatever. And if you have, some sort of multiplayer game and you hand me the controller and I drop into this scene and I have no idea what's going on, there's like chaos around me, right? And I'm really vulnerable because I don't even necessarily know all the buttons and I'm not as fast as everybody else. You could think about like a virtual reality game too, where you are just dropped into a scenario and then there's a space where you need to perform. Saturn stops, slows. Aries says go. Aries says now. Saturn says wait, have patience. These are some of the differences between Aries and Saturn, and this is some of the reasons for the fall here. And I think this says a lot about how we can think about Saturn coming into the sign of Aries and into the house where Aries is within our chart. You all know that I use the whole sign house system, so feel free to use whatever system that works best for you and the one that you like to use. But when we think about light and dark, when we think about birth, starting initiatory, and decay, things falling away, we can think of youthfulness versus age, right? The young versus the old. You can have generational conflicts here, right? You can have the father versus the son, or it doesn't have to be gender related, right? You just have the differencing of wisdom and experience versus something new, something that's starting, right? Something that maybe hasn't went through the experiences. It's the beginning of the zodiac, right? Where we find Saturn signs much further towards like the end of the zodiac if you look at it in a evolutionary type standpoint here. So old structures falling away, new structures replacing them. And you think about that battle, think about the conflict between that, right? Think about a teenager that is finding its own independence and a parent that it might be bucking up against, you know, and there's some sort of difficulties or spats that pop up, right? That's very common and very, very natural, I think. So those type of conflicts and those type of struggles back and forth of the new that is coming in and the old, it doesn't have to be that literal as like generational between actual people. It can be the ideas, it can be our creations and the passions that are going. You know, maybe there's some sort of internal conflict for some of us of old structures coming that maybe are ready to fall away, but they've been there for so long that they feel like pillars, and then there's something new that is coming in here. I'm thinking about hitting the brake and the gas pedal at the same time, right? So like maybe you go and then you stop. Maybe there's a momentum that feels like you're pulling you forward, but there's something that is slowing you down at the same time. It's quite contradictory in some scenarios. Stern authority. There is definitely a level of authority and in the sign of Aries. There's also like autonomy and having our own self-authority. I think I mentioned that a little bit earlier. So that stern authority of this is what we need to do and we need to do it like right now, right? So if we talk about the battlefield scenario, right? The stern authority could be the you know, the person that's leading the troops into battle, or you know, if you have somebody that's leading a team in some sort of game, if we go back to like the video game analogy here, that person who says, this is the way we need to go, we need to do it this way. When I think of Aries, I think about action, right? Mars, there's movement, there's drive, there's motivation, there's determination, there's that creative, passionate energy, but it comes from somewhere, right? So there's action. Saturn often brings us consequences and reality checks. So I'm wondering about the consequences that come from actions that are put into place maybe hastily, or things that just we jump right into, right? Now, sometimes that bravery, that courage that comes along with Aries is very much needed to start and initiate something. And I think there's going to be, personally and collectively, there's going to be old and new structures that are going to be simultaneously forming. And there's some of these new structures that form really could have some longevity to them. And just as well as some of the structures and forms that are going to start to fall away. Are going to feel very pillar-like. They're going to feel there's been some longevity. They've been around. They're very old. They've been around for a very, very long time, right? Things that stand the test of time, starting and initiating and ending all at the same time. I'm thinking about strong, long-lasting strength, right? There is a strength and there is a courage that comes with the sign of Aries. Well, Saturn is very determined and very deliberate. So, and it likes things that can have longevity, right? It can keep burning, it can keep going. So it's that controlled burn thing. So you have the long-lasting strength. So you have endurance that can come along with this. Contradictorily, you can also have the lack of energy, the lack of motivation, because sometimes Saturn says no, right? So that might feel like we're pinned down, and that might bring us back to that generational type conflict, even if it's not in a literal sense, even if it's you know, within our own psyche, right? We can have different generations within our own mind and our own psyche and our own life, if you think about it, right? You have different chapters and different periods of our lives. You think, I was in a totally different space, you know, and you know, this time period than I am now. And you can look at a time period you're in now and think, you know, this is my whatever era, right? Like we use that type of word a lot. Like this is my, you know, child raising era, or whatever it may be here. But the boundaries and the limits and the creative starts bucking up against each other here, right? So trying to find that balance, trying to find the balance and the motivation there of where are the limits of our creativity? How far can we go before we burn out? Where is the instability or the inconsistency, right? Aries is really, really good about starting things, not always great about the follow through. Think about that fire. Once you start and initiate it, you got to tend to it. Think about that little seedling in that plant. You have to protect it. You have to give it the ideal scenario that it needs to be able to prosper, right? And there's there's a fight and there's a struggle in the sign of Aries. And in both of these scenarios of the fire and the seedling, there is a struggle to overcome, right? Think about that seed that, you know, it's underground at first when you plant a seed, right? It's in the dirt. It has to emerge, the little seedling has to emerge from the seed, and it has to push its way up through the dirt. There is a struggle that is there, right? When you're starting a fire, often there are elements that are against you, whether there is moisture, whether there's too much wind to get it started, or, you know, you have to, if you're out, you know, out in nature somewhere, you have to make sure you can find, you know, the kindling and the wood and the leaves and the brush and what you need to keep the fire going. So there's work, there's a struggle that can happen here. And I think we're going to see that symbolically play out many, many different ways. And then, you know, not to mention that Saturn is going to be making the conjunction with Neptune, right? Neptune already moved into the sign of Aries. As soon as Saturn moves in, you can consider those two planets being conjoined. They are going to conjoin shortly here, later on this month, exact. So we're going to talk about this for the next couple weeks for sure, especially in our meditations. So that's a whole nother level of Saturn in the sign of Aries interacting with Neptune here, right at the start, right at the initiatory. I'm thinking about that as the intersection of the energetic and the physical realms, right? The boundaries of our creations and our psyches and exploring that space, right? Both Saturn and Neptune, from my perspective, have a lot to do with the boundaries and the limitations and maybe what's within the boundaries in the scope of the physical, the boundaries in the scope of the field and the world that we're playing within. But then what if we go just beyond that, right? What if we are brave and courageous enough to step into something just beyond what we can see, right? What if it's not that seeing is believing? What if it's that believing is seeing? Kind of like that. That structures, those forms that are simultaneously falling away and coming into a new space there, very Neptunian as well. So there is a lot of fire and passion about our beliefs with Neptune in the sign of Aries, right? You can go back a couple of videos and we talked a lot about that when Neptune ingressed into the sign of Aries. So when you have these fiery beliefs that are just really lighting us up and filling us up inside, that Aries tendency to move and to go and to, you know, break through boundaries and barriers might really feel pronounced there. Saturn there is forming and giving the structures, right? It can also say no if the forms and the structures are not where we need to be. But yeah, this is an interesting time that we are all living in personally and collectively here. So that's Saturn moving into the sign of Aries. Think about the Aries sector of your chart. Think about the house. Think about the topics. If you're not sure, you can look it up on the internet. You can Google it. We can do a reading, or we can get in depth and we can talk about the transits and the placements that you have. Think about those house topics and think about where you've been feeling a pull to start shifting, to start changing the forms and the structures, right? And move into a meditation with that. Move into a space where you can have some conversation with that. Where do I see this showing up in my life? Where do I feel this pull? That's a good meditation here for us as Saturn enters the sign of Aries. So that's Friday. And then if we go ahead and move forward into Saturday, February 14th, happy Valentine's to all of you that will be celebrating that holiday there. I've long called it a Hallmark holiday, but we all love a little Valentine's Day on some level. So yeah, I won't deny that either. Capricorn moon this day, no major lunar aspects and no major aspects here. So just rolling with that Capricorn moon on Valentine's Day here. So that's what we have going on for this week. Big shifts with Saturn moving into the sign of Aries. I think Venus moving into the sign of Pisces will soften maybe some things. Also, you know, Neptune has been in the sign of Aries since like 2011. So we've had like 13, 14 years of Neptune in the sign of Pisces. So this is the first time that we've gotten Venus in the sign of Pisces without Neptune being co-present and without Saturn being co-present for the last couple years, but really Neptune for quite some time. So I'm wondering if it'll feel a little more pure Venusian for some of us, right? Some of that fogginess, haziness that you, and that confusion that you can find in the sign of Pisces that is amplified by Neptune being there. Wondering if there's some clarity, wondering if we can get a little bit close, maybe not necessarily clarity, but get a little closer to the source of what it is that we are looking to feel emotionally connected with here, right? And reflecting on that. And then as Saturn and Neptune are coming together in the sign of Aries, you can start and you can initiate from that, right? And we're rolling into eclipse season too. So shifts and changes and beginnings and endings there as well. All right, that's what we have for this week. It doesn't sound like a ton, but the ingress is huge, right? So I hope everybody has a great week. Take care. And take care of yourself and take care of others. There's a lot going on in a lot of places, personally and collectively. So just take care. You know, whatever you need to do to relax your nervous system, please do it. And Venus in the sign of Pisces is inviting us to be gentle, right? These planets moving into the sign of Aries are not so gentle. So as we're pushing forward, as that seed is emerging, as that fire is being ignited, and we are, you know, tending to the fire of our passions and of our lives and of our drives, try to remember to be tender with yourself a little bit at the same time, right? Maybe that's one of the reminders that Venus in the sign of Pisces at this ingress is there to give us. And finally, if you've made it to the end of this video and you haven't already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because we might as well walk this astrological journey together, right? Getting more perspectives, getting more views and other takes on the astrology is always beneficial. Yeah, so that's what I have for this week. I hope everybody has a wonderful week. Take care, and I will see you at our live meditation and next week here in a video. All right.